We'll take our reading this morning from Matthew chapter 24 in preparation for our brother James's exhort today. And it's good for us each week to be encouraged and uplifted before we partake of the emblems together, and we're very much looking forward to brother James's words this morning. He's going to be exhorting us to the theme of be ready and active. Thanks, brother James.
Thanks, Phil, and very good morning, everyone. It's lovely to be with you this morning. So we have a very simple exhortation this morning. This is the take-home message. Be ready, be active. But simple, but not necessarily easy. And so we want to dig into Matthew 24, and I got this kind of simple theme out of Matthew chapter 24, and I found it really interesting coming to this chapter and digging a little bit deeper. I'm very familiar with the chapter. I always found a little confusing at which parts kind of are talking about AD 70 and which parts are talking about our day. So we'll try to unpack that a little bit, because I think what it does when we do that is it brings to focus this chapter, the exhortation that is especially for us. And it's a simple and powerful exhortation, which we'll look at this morning. And of course, we do live in the last days. We feel that, we know that. And it's a challenging time to live, as we read in other parts of Scripture. It's a challenging time. And just our readings last night, I think it was, in 2 Timothy, we had that big list of things, attributes, behaviors that would be common in the last days. So we have this all around us. And we have these natures that pull us in a direction away from God. And we have a culture and society that entices us in that direction too. So it is challenging. We have these pulls and pushes that kind of draw us away, and we're influenced and impacted by things which are contrary to what God would have us do. So I think this exhortation, hopefully, is exhortation of Jesus, will help focus us and bring us closer to Him as we go forward in this new week. So just go to the next slide. And this is just a bit of a U-turn that I took when taking a look at this chapter. I was challenged, actually, when I dug a little bit deeper into this, and we're going to share that this morning. And we kind of know the story, and perhaps go on to the next slide there. And we have two main groups Jesus is talking to, and that's fairly clear. There's the people he's actually talking to right in front of him on this Olivet prophecy, and these are the group of believers, the disciples that would face the end of the Jewish age. And that came, as we know, in AD 70 with the destruction of Jerusalem. Their worlds were completely turned upside down. So a very significant end time. And then the second group is those living at the end of the Gentile age, and that's us. Again, living in a very, very important and significant period of time. And Jesus is talking to both these groups at the same time in an incredible, masterful way. All of course, Jesus's sermons and exhortations to us are incredible. And I think we'll see that as we go through this chapter. Now, what I found is that most of the signs in this chapter, where there's a lot of signs here, are actually in reference to group number one. And a lot of the parables, which kind of just start at the end of the chapter and go into the next chapter, which is the continuation of his talk, his exhort, is directed at group number two. So we'll take a look at that. And of course, we do have signs in Scripture. It's not to say there's no signs for us at all. Just in this Sermon on the Mount that Jesus is talking to his disciples and to us, he's distinguishing these two groups, and he's focusing a special message to both groups. And for us, we'll take a look at what that particular message is. Now, just going back to the context here, we have Jesus walking out of Jerusalem, and he's walking out of this temple area and out of Jerusalem for the very last time. It was only days away from his crucifixion. And Jesus had presented himself as the Messiah, and largely they had rejected him. And in a kind of a literal way, the glory was departing out of the temple. And it wasn't to return until that day when Jesus comes again. And in the previous chapter, in Matthew chapter 23, we have Jesus kind of expressing his emotions around this, like in verse 37 to 39, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the one who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you are not willing. See, your house is left desolate, for I say to you, you shall see me no more till you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." So with this quite emotional state of mind, Jesus exits the temple in Jerusalem for the last time. And of course, there will be a time when he gathers those, his elect, from all over the world as a hen gathers her chicks. But for now, he knows there's a terrible time coming. And the disciples are on quite a different plane. They're marveling at the wonderful buildings of the temple, and it was quite an impressive structure. And if you go on YouTube, you can actually zoom through these 3D models of what the temple was like, and it really is impressive. Even in our day and age, the scale of it, the beauty of it would have been remarkable, especially for these middle-class kind of disciples who were coming from Galilee. It would have been quite and spectacular thing to behold. So they're quite in different places, Jesus and his disciples, as they're leaving the temple. And while the disciples are trying to draw Jesus' attention to these magnificent structures, Jesus kind of responds and says, "You see all these things? Truly I say unto you, there will not be one stone left on another that will be not thrown down." So he kind of brings a reality check to the disciples, and that gets them really thinking. And sometime later, when they're on the Mount of Olives, they come to him privately and they ask him the question, which results in this incredible Olivet prophecy. And the next slide, we have what the question is. It says, "Tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the age?" And there's actually three kind of parts, or the three parts to this question. And the next part of the slide is just highlighting, what did the disciples mean when they asked this question? Like, we always just assume that they're talking about the second coming of Jesus as we understand it, his literal return from heaven to come and set up the kingdom. But that is not their understanding at this point in time. They didn't understand that Jesus was going anywhere, that they thought the kingdom was coming right then and there. I mean, that was the message Jesus was preaching to some extent. The kingdom of heaven is at hand. That was the message they were told to go out and preach. The kingdom of heaven's at hand. And sometime later, when Jesus tried to explain to them that, yes, he was going away, in John 16 and verse 18, they didn't understand. And they say, "What is it that he says? A little while, we do not know what he is saying." So they didn't have this understanding and appreciation of an absence of the Lord before he comes again. So what are they thinking when they say, "What are the signs of your coming?" Well, I think the key is rooted in Old Testament language. And if we go to the next slide, there's a lot of examples of God, the language that talks about God coming and visiting a city to bring judgment, to come and visit the city and destroy that city. And that's what I believe that the disciples were talking about when they say, "What is the sign of your coming? What is the sign of your coming to destroy Jerusalem and the temple and set up your kingdom?" And there's some examples of this in Jeremiah and in Joel. It's really this image of God coming and really leading the armies, that whether it's Babylon or the Roman armies coming to destroy Jerusalem, or in some cases in Isaiah, the same language is used with the destruction of Babylon. So it's, in a similar way, it's this kind of heralding of destruction which is brought about by God. So I think that's how the disciples are interpreting this. And for them, all the events were one and the same. The temple being thrown down, Jesus coming to bring judgment and establishing the kingdom. That's what they were expecting. Jesus as their Messiah to set up the kingdom and restore the kingdom to Israel. So if we go to the next slide, it's where are we? This is really what they were saying. So when will the temple be destroyed? Is there a sign that we'll have that will herald your coming to visit Jerusalem, to judge the rulers and to be accepted by the people as you usher in the kingdom age? So that's where their mind is at. But Jesus, of course, has a much broader understanding, and in his response, he addresses two different groups. Their group, the end of the Jewish age, and our group, the end of the Gentile age. So he does this in a really remarkable way, and it is a little bit difficult to tease this apart. And I do think there's a couple of layers where there's dual applications going on here as well. But the main way he kind of distinguishes the two groups is by two different Greek words that he uses for coming. So he talks about two comings, and he uses two different words to describe this. The first coming is bringing destruction to Jerusalem, and that's kind of what the disciples were thinking, the end of this Jewish age. And then, of course, the second coming to set up his kingdom. So the next slide looks at these two words, and it's the Greek word parousia and the Greek word okomai. These are the two words for coming that we'll see scattered throughout this chapter. And when you kind of put them into the context, and you also dig deeper into the historical, the history behind it all, we can tease apart a little bit more clearly the sections which we're referring to Group 1 and Group 2. Now, parousia occurs 4 times on the next slide. And this, I believe, is a reference to AD 70. Whenever you read the word parousia, the context is suggesting AD 70. So the first group he's primarily talking to when he uses this word. And here are the examples that we have in verse 3, verse 27, verse 37, and verse 39. And it's talking about, the Lord's presence in bringing in that Roman army to bring destruction on Jerusalem, including the temples, the stones being thrown down, as Jesus had earlier spoke about. Now, the other word on the next slide is erkamai, and this occurs 5 times. And you'll notice that the first time it shows up is in verse 30, and verse 42, and verse 44, verse 25 into chapter 25, verse 13, and verse 31 of chapter 25. And this is a reference to his literal second coming. And the meaning of the words kind of support that as well. The meaning of the word erkamai means a literal presence, a coming, and making oneself known. Whereas parousia is more of a presence. So if we were to kind of map this out in our Bibles, this is kind of the suggested breakdown of the different groups Jesus is talking to, what parts are referring to what group. So we have the first part right up to verse 30, talking about AD 70. And then in verse 30 and 31, there's a snapshot forward to the kingdom age, the second coming of Jesus, the literal coming to set up his kingdom. Then it flips back to AD 70, and then it goes on to the second coming again. There's a couple of sections here which I think there's scriptural basis for a dual application. And that's the talking about the abomination of desolation. I think there's an application to the second coming of Jesus in that. And also the fig tree. I think there's an application to our day and age as well there. And then when we go into chapter 25, it's all talking about his second coming, the reference and the parables in this chapter. So it's actually interesting as well. There's a subtle difference. Sorry, I forgot to tell you, but you're keeping up nicely. Thank you. The next slide kind of compares the different gospel accounts, and you'll notice a subtle difference in Matthew. They add on a little bit extra into the question, and that's the end of the age. Mark and Luke don't record that, and they also don't record any of the parables. So that's kind of interesting as well. Now, go on to the next slide. You'll see a yellow line there. And this yellow line kind of divides the Olivet prophecy into two parts. The first part is all the signs, and the second part are all the parables. And if you go to the next slide, it kind of summarizes what I think is what we get when we tease this apart. We have group number one, getting several signs and one parable. And then we have group number two, getting one sign and several parables. So we'll take a look at, well, what is that one sign for us? That we're group two. What is that one sign, and what are these parables? So the next slide kind of just breaks down this in a little bit of a visual way. We have the signs and we have the parables. And you'll notice there's a number of parables which kind of start at the end of chapter 24 and go into chapter 25. And perhaps the next slide on here is the signs. And Jesus is really trying to prepare his followers, his believers, for a really difficult period that was coming, and one that would culminate in the temple being destroyed. And that abomination of desolation is a reference to the Roman army under Titus coming down and besieging the city, surrounding it, besieging it, eventually destroying it, and burning the place down to literally knocking down the stones of the temple. And that was, if you look at history, an incredibly difficult and challenging period. Over 1 million people died, they estimate, during this siege. Thousands of Jews were crucified. Parents were brought to cannibalism because of the intense famine. The temple was burnt to the ground. The Jewish system of worship completely upended. So it kind of brings to life those verses 21 and 22. For then shall be a great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor shall ever be. And except those days shall be shortened, there shall no flesh be saved. But for the elect's sake, the days shall be shortened. So it was a really awful period of time that they were going to face. So Jesus preparing them, and he gives them all these signs and says, be ready. So in verse 30, he takes a break from the signs and provides a glimpse into his second coming, his glorious return, his literal coming. And verse 29, we have the sun being darkened and the moon not giving out its light, the stars falling from heaven. And it's kind of a symbol of the Jewish world collapsing, the Jewish system, everything came crashing down. Excuse me. And then we come to verse 30, which is the one sign which is clearly a reference to us, to our day. So what is this sign in verse 30? And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he shall send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. So, and then this is where we can insert a gap, a 2,000-year gap. Jesus shifts from the destruction of Jerusalem to his literal second coming. And another just interesting thing on the next slide, You'll notice the change of the pronouns from you to they. So 25, 26 are you, then it's they, and then 32, 33, 34, it flips back to you. So it kind of supports this kind of breakdown that he's shifting gears, he's focusing on another group into the future. Of course, that's us. So our sign, we get one sign, and it's the Son of Man in heaven. That's our sign. Our sign is the return of Jesus. That's it. And I think it's very intentional that Jesus is really trying to focus us on this reality that we just have to be ready. When we see this sign, that's kind of it. Jesus is here. And there's no more time after that. We have to be ready now and be watchful, because we have to live in this state of continual readiness, a state of being constantly prepared, expecting the return of Jesus, because he knows there's a very real risk to this group that will be distracted and will be allured and will be deceived by the world around us, which is rapidly moving away from God's ways. So the clear, pointed exhortation to us, and it's quite incredible. This is especially a message of Jesus over 2,000 years ago to us, not to any real other generation. I'm sure it had application in previous times, but this is a special message, especially to us, that we get from Jesus. And he's focusing us on this very point of just being ready for his return. The mindset of welcoming the return of Jesus, of expecting it and being ready for it. And that leads into the parables. And, I missed one slide. Yeah, next slide is really bringing out this point of watch therefore, for you know not what hour your Lord doth come. So this idea of always being ready, always watching and being ready. For yet in such an hour as you think not, the Son of Man cometh. And then this leads into the last slide there, which is the parables. And we're just going to look at these four just to close off our exhortation, because there's some really practical and powerful lessons from Jesus to us in these parables, living at the end of the Gentile age. The first one is quite simple. It's the parable of the thief. If the good man of the house had known in what watch the thief would come, he would have watched, and he would not have suffered his house to be broken up. So simple exhortation to be especially alert for the Lord's coming, because it will come when many are not expecting it. And the return of Jesus needs to be this constant focus in our lives, a longing and desire for our Lord's return, and a living in readiness for it. The household servants in Matthew 24, at the end of Matthew 24, we have the faithful and wise servant who has been put in charge of his master's household. And he's found being busy serving when Jesus comes. And I think that's a really key point for us as well. Busy serving their brothers and sisters, providing meat in due season, providing nourishment and support. And at the end of his discourse, we see Jesus kind of highlighting what this means. It's doing kind and practical things to the least of these, my brethren, serving those who are hungry, thirsty, poor, oppressed, isolated. In contrast, the evil servant, which says in his heart, my Lord delays his coming, starts to smite his fellow servants and eat and drink with the drunken. And this person, it says, will be cut off, and there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Notice it says in their hearts. They might not verbally say this, but deep down they don't really believe that the return of Jesus is imminent. And that's reflected in the way they live. They're distracted by unhealthy, worldly activities that are self-indulgent and self-centered, and they become abusive to their brothers and sisters. And that word smite has the idea to thump, and a repeated thump, repeated blows like a hammer, just thumping, thumping, thumping. And according to Strong's, it means to punish or to offend the conscience or to wound. So I don't think we need to interpret this as literally physically beating up each other, but perhaps in our actions or our agenda pushing, where we're offending the conscience of others and we just keep on doing it without regard for the impact that it's having on others. So the exhortation is really clear. There needs to be this genuine belief that our Lord's return is so near, and this motivates us to serve our brothers and sisters, engage in ecclesial activities, not thinking, well, what can I get out of it? But, how can I contribute to our ecclesia? How can I build up? How can I listen and care and show support for others? Engaging in activities that help the least of these Christ's brethren. And we heard about that in the announcements this morning. Those who are suffering, those who we need to be mindful of and responsive to, which we have this morning in this collection. And we know we have brothers and sisters all over the world who have great needs. And they are, regardless of where they live, what language they speak, what they look like, we know that our brothers and sisters are our family, and many of them need support. And we need to be ecclesial builders, building each other up, showing enthusiasm and passion and encouraging people in a positive way. So that's the exhortation from that parable. The wise and foolish virgins. This is really an expansion on the wise servant. And we know this parable really well. I love this parable. The virgins, a virgin is someone betrothed to be married. Jesus is marrying a multitudinous bride. The virgins are all of us. And there's 10. They all have lamps. It's the reserve of oil, which is the distinguishing feature between the two groups. And I think the oil is perhaps our faith in action. We have the lamp as God's word. Then we add our faith to that, and we really ignite. Something radical happens in our lives. We ignite, and it's that combustion, that combination of God's word with our faith which is intertwined with our actions. That's what makes us ready and prepared for our Lord's return. And we know the Jewish custom after the betrothal, they would separate for a long time, that their engagement period would vary in length. The husband would be there preparing the house in his father's house for when the bride would come. The bride would be off with her mother in her mother's home preparing herself, and she would be unaware exactly at what point her bridegroom would come and call for her. So it's this, just think of the emotions around that. That should be kind of how we feel, that longing, that desire, really positive frame of mind, that anticipation, the excitement of Christ coming. So it's really a positive way it's being placed. It's not this fearful dreading of judgment. It's looking forward to this wedding feast of the Lord. So she would have been waiting and longing and anticipating. And in this parable, there seems to be an excessive delay. And the bridegroom comes at a time when she's not expecting. At midnight, the cry is made. They're not expecting it. They're sleeping. They're slumbering. There's an enormous shout. Behold, the bridegroom cometh. Suddenly, they're all wide awake. They're trimming their lamps into full brightness, but those who are unprepared, they don't have enough oil for their lamps, and they make a mad dash to go and buy more oil. But we know the lesson of this parable is it's just too late. It's too late at that point, and they find themselves unprepared, and they are not welcomed to the wedding feast. So exhortation is be ready. Ensure our faith is alive and active, and be preparing and developing and practicing our faith now. This is our time to practice our faith. Faith's just not something you can just get at the last minute. We have to develop it and practice it. And that's what we have the opportunity to do now, is practice our faith. Because when we see that sign, it's like time over. There's no opportunity to make up for lost time when Jesus is here. And some suggest that there might be a bit of a gap between the sign of Jesus coming and when we're called away to judgment. And I need to dig into this a little bit more, but just imagine that is the case. There's a bit of a gap between those two events. Imagine what it would be like. Imagine how you'd be feeling during that period of time. Jesus, we know, is here. He's come. There's a sign in heaven of his return. And we're just in this period of waiting to be called off and taken to the judgment seat. We won't be going about our routine work or going to uni or school, right? No way. We'll be trimming our lambs. We'll be focused on spiritual matters. We'll be having Bible class every single night of the week. Those who have drifted away will suddenly be coming back. Friends from work will be phoning us. What's going on? How will you be feeling during that time period if indeed there is a gap there? It's too late to make any changes. There's no longer opportunity to buy oil. The time to demonstrate our faith is done. The ship has sailed. The door is shut. What will be your mood during that time? For those who are living in this state of expectation, of watching, of eagerness, of excitement for Christ's return, it'll be a joyous time. We'll be nervous, sure, but we'll be there encouraging each other and being ready. But if we know we've really got many things undone and we haven't filled our lamps properly, it'll be a terrible time of panic and terror and fear for what might be coming. So the exhortation is simple. Watch therefore, for you don't know the day or hour when Jesus appears. We need to be ready and active now. Our faith's got to be alive. And that is shown by our actions to our brothers and sisters. So finally, the talents, the faithful servant, the expansion on the faithful servant. This describes the activity of the faithful believers, and it's really emphasizing how we use the natural talents and opportunities God gives us. And our willingness to work is affected by our attitude towards God and how we view him. If we view him as this hard, unreasonable master who's just gonna judge us and it's impossible nearly to get into the kingdom, that will impact on our willingness to work and how we engage in the ecclesia. But if we have this positive attitude, that likewise also will have an impact on how we engage and how we work. So we come now to remember our Lord Jesus, who spoke these words especially to us, to encourage us, to prepare us, so that we can be there with him at the wedding feast. And he drives this point home over and over and over again because we need it. We need this simple exhortation. It's a simple exhortation, but not an easy one. It's difficult to do this because we do get distracted. But it's a very simple exhortation to be ready, to be always ready, to be active in his service. And we know shortly after Jesus spoke these words to his disciples, he was taken away and crucified. But he rose from the dead. He ascended to heaven. And we know he's with his Father, preparing for that time of the wedding feast. He's waiting for the time when his Father will say it's time. And he will come for us, his brothers and sisters, his bride. The trumpet will sound and there will be a call. And we will very likely be the generation that sees the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. So we live at the end of this Gentile age. We know a momentous change is coming, thankfully. Our living Lord, who remember in the bread and the wine, is coming. So let us be faithful now and let us be wise now so that we can celebrate with him when he comes.